My father called me the slow one every Thanksgiving, right there at the dinner table, like it was just another thing to be thankful for, that he had one brilliant daughter and one who needed extra time to tie her shoes. I'm 31 years old. My name is Lenora Ashby. For most of my life, I believed him. My older sister, Viveka, graduated summa cum laude from Duke. She went straight into corporate law, made junior partner by 28. And by the time she was 30, she had a corner office in downtown Charlotte and a fiancé whose family had a vacation house on the Outer Banks. My father, Reginald, talked about Viveka the way other men talked about winning seasons, with the kind of pride that leaves no room in the sentence for anyone else. I had ADHD. Diagnosed at 9, medicated at 10, quietly humiliated for the rest of my childhood. The letters didn't swim for me the way they did for some kids. My problem was focus. My brain was always somewhere else, watching the light change through the classroom window, wondering what would happen if you mixed the colors in a paint set in the wrong order, thinking about everything except what was in front of me. My teachers called it distractible. My father called it lazy. My mother just looked tired. What none of them saw was that I could hold an entire floor plan in my head without drawing it once. That I could walk through a building and know immediately what was wrong with it, where the light was bad, where the flow was off, where something was pretending to be something it wasn't. I became an interior designer, not because I chose it as a career. I chose it because it was the only thing that made my brain go quiet. My father thought it was a hobby. Reginald Ashby ran Ashby Renovation Group, a residential contracting business my grandfather, Pop Ashby, had started in 1978 out of a two-car garage in Raleigh, with a truck, a tool belt, and a reputation for never cutting corners. By the time I was born, the company was worth somewhere around $40 million. It had expanded into commercial renovation, historic restoration, and custom builds across the Carolinas. My grandfather had built something real. My father had grown it and, in my opinion, quietly let it calcify. Pop Ashby died when I was 14. Heart attack, February, a Tuesday. He was the only person in my families who ever asked me what I thought about something before he told me I was wrong. At his funeral, my father stood at the front of the church in a dark suit and said that Pop had always known Reginald would carry the business forward. He said it with such confidence that I wondered if he remembered what Pop had actually said to me. 3 weeks before he died, when he took me out to a job site and showed me a historic building they were restoring in downtown Durham. "Lenora," he said, his hand on my shoulder, his voice the way it always was, warm and a little tired and completely honest. "You see this the way I see it. Don't let anyone tell you that doesn't count for something." I was 14. I didn't know what he was giving me. I thought he was just being kind. After Pop died, I watched my father take over completely. The company, the family narrative, the dinner table. Viveka became his chosen successor in every conversation he had, even though she was a lawyer and had never once picked up a demolition hammer. It was the idea of Viveka, the credential of her, that mattered to him. She was the proof that Reginald Ashby had built something better than a contracting business. He'd built a legacy. I was the proof of nothing. I was the one who had needed an IEP in 6th grade. The one who forgot to mail things. The one who showed up to family Christmas with the same energy as someone who'd just survived a turbulent flight. Present but scattered, grateful it was over. After college, University of North Carolina, interior design degree, 4.5 years because I had to retake 1 semester. I got a job at a small firm in Raleigh. I was good at it. Not in a way that made headlines, in a way that made clients call back. I applied to work at Ashby Renovation Group 3 years after graduation. I thought maybe my father and I could build something together, that maybe my skills could actually fit into what he was doing. He hired me as a project coordinator, $44,000 a year. I scheduled subcontractors and ordered materials, and sat in meetings where my suggestions were occasionally nodded at and never written down. Viveka became Chief Operating Officer the same year. Her salary, I found out later through a conversation I wasn't supposed to overhear, was 260,000 plus profit sharing. I told myself it was fine, that I was building towards something. That patience was a skill too. I was still telling myself that the night before Viveka's engagement party, when my father sat me down at the kitchen island and told me he needed to talk to me about the company's future. He was getting older, he said. He was thinking about the transition. Viveka would eventually step into the CEO role, and my position— he paused, took a sip of his bourbon— my position was going to be restructured. He was bringing in a project management firm to handle coordination. He thought I might be happier somewhere that's better suited my strengths. What strengths? I asked. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. You're a people person, Lenora. You're warm. Maybe something in hospitality, or I'm a designer, Dad, honey. He set his glass down. We do construction. It's a different skill set. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I drove home and sat in my apartment and stared at the wall and thought about Pop Ashby showing me that building in Durham, his voice saying, "You see this the way I see it." The engagement party was at the country club. 300 guests, past appetizers, a string quartet that played Viveka's favorite Chopin nocturne during cocktail hour because she had requested it, and my father had paid for it. I wore a blue dress I'd owned for 4 years and spent 20 minutes in the parking lot collecting myself before going inside. My father's toast was 12 minutes long. I know because I counted. He talked about Viveka's accomplishments, her tenacity, her grace under pressure. He talked about her fiancé Clifford, who came from a good family and had an MBA from Wharton. He talked about the future of the Ashby name and what it would mean for it to continue in such capable hands. He did not mention me. Not in the toast. Not in the follow-up remarks. Not when he circulated through the room and I was standing 3 feet away. A cousin I barely knew came up to me halfway through the evening and said, "It's so nice that you could come support your sister," in a tone that suggested she assumed I had no other reason to be there. I smiled. I said thank you. I found an empty seat near the bar and sat down. That's when I saw her. An older woman, early 70s, silver hair cut short, sitting alone at the end of the bar with a glass of white wine, and the relaxed posture of someone who had outlasted every room she'd ever sat in. She was watching the party the way I was. Not unhappily, just clearly. She caught me looking and raised her glass slightly. I did the same. She walked over 5 minutes later. "You have the face of someone calculating how long they have to stay before it's acceptable to leave." I laughed for the first time all evening. 40 more minutes. She sat down in the empty chair beside me. "I'm Frances Hollis," she said. "I was your grandfather's attorney for the last 18 years of his life." I straightened in my chair. I didn't know Pop had a private attorney. Most people didn't. She turned her wineglass slowly in her hands. He was a private man about certain things. He said the people who mattered would find out what they needed to know when the time was right. She reached into her purse and set a cream-colored envelope on the cocktail table between us. My name was written on the front in handwriting I recognized immediately. Thin, precise, slightly slanted. My grandfather's. "He gave me this 4 months before he passed," she said, "with very specific instructions about when to deliver it. 14 years ago. Yes." She looked toward the stage where my father was posing for photographs with Viveka and Clifford. "He told me to give it to you on the night your father made clear publicly and completely what he thought your future was worth." She looked back at me. "I believe tonight qualifies." My hands were unsteady as I picked up the envelope. "What's inside?" "His will." She said it simply, the way people say things they've been holding for a long time. "The one your father doesn't know about." I stared at her. "He filed a second will in 2003, she said. 9 months after he was diagnosed with the heart condition he didn't tell anyone about. He wanted time to think, time to watch." She glanced at my father again. "He watched for 4 months. Then he came to me. What does it say?" Frances Hollis looked at me with the steady calm of someone who had kept a secret for 14 years and was finally, quietly, setting it down. It says you're the majority shareholder of Ashby Renovation Group. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with the envelope in front of me for 2 hours before I opened it. When I finally did, I read it slowly. I read every sentence twice, some of them 3 times. Not because I couldn't understand them, but because my brain kept telling me I must be reading it wrong. I, Harold James Ashby, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this my final and binding last will and testament, revoking all prior documents. To my granddaughter, Lenora June Ashby, I bequeath 52% of my ownership shares in Ashby Renovation Group, along with all associated voting rights and governance privileges. There was a paragraph below that. I read it 4 times. This bequest reflects my belief that Lenora has inherited the quality that built this company. Not credentials, not pedigree, but the ability to look at something broken and know how to make it whole. She has been overlooked in this family, not because she lacks what it takes, but because no one bothered to ask what she was building. I am asking now. I am answering on her behalf. I put the letter down and cried. In a way I hadn't cried since I was 12 years old. And finally understood that my father's disappointment was structural. Not temporary, not something I could fix by trying harder. The will included a condition. To claim the shares, I had to submit a formal ownership declaration to the company's registered agent within 60 hours of receiving the document. After that, the window closed. Everything reverted to the 2001 will, which left the company entirely to my father. 60 hours. It would close at 11 p.m. on the third day. I called Frances Hollis at 7 the next morning. She answered on the second ring. "I'm doing it," I said. "I know." Her voice was warm. "He knew too. He said you'd call early." She walked me through the process. The ownership declaration had to be filed with the company's registered agent and simultaneously noticed to the board of directors. Ashby Renovation Group had a small board, 5 members, 2 of whom had known my grandfather personally. "Your grandfather was well liked by this board," Frances said. "He built relationships over decades. Your father has not always maintained those relationships with the same care." A pause. "I've already been in touch with 2 directors. They've agreed to acknowledge your ownership claim and call a special board session. My father is going to say Pop wasn't competent when he wrote it. He's going to try. That's why your grandfather had it witnessed by 3 independent parties and stored with my firm and in sealed escrow at a private bank." He anticipated the argument. Frances allowed herself a small pause. He was a very thorough man. The 60 hours felt like weather, something I was moving through rather than controlling. I slept in broken stretches. I ate things I don't remember. I spent most of the second day in Frances's office, going over the documents, the board member histories, the company bylaws. Frances also showed me something else. A folder of materials my grandfather had included with his instructions to her, sealed separately, to be opened alongside the will. Inside, a series of internal memos from 2008 through 2012, the years my father had pushed through a management restructuring of Ashby Renovation Group. In those years, Reginald had quietly reduced the board's oversight authority, consolidated vendor contracts into relationships that benefited him personally, and redirected a portion of the historic preservation contracts, the work my grandfather had been most proud of, toward cheaper, faster builds. My grandfather had documented everything. He'd watched his son dismantle pieces of what he built, and he'd kept the records, and he'd put them in a folder with a date stamp and given them to his attorney. He wasn't just leaving me shares, he was leaving me the truth. The board meeting was called for 10 a.m. on the third day, a Thursday, at Ashby Renovation Group's main office in Raleigh. I arrived at 9:45 in a blazer. I'd borrowed from a friend and shoes I'd polished the night before for the first time in 2 years. My father was already in the conference room when I arrived. He stood when I walked in, and the look on his face. I had seen versions of it my whole life, the particular blend of surprise and dismissal he wore when I did something he hadn't predicted. But this version was different. This one had something underneath it. Something that looked like the beginning of fear. "What is this?" he said. "A board meeting." I set my portfolio on the table. "You can't just." He turned to Frances, who had come in behind me. "What exactly do you think you're doing, bringing her here like I'm her attorney?" Frances said. "I'm doing my job. I'd suggest you let the board speak." The 5 board members were already seated. Howard Briggs, who had been my grandfather's first hire outside the family and had known me since I was in elementary school, gave me a quiet nod from across the table. Martha Ewan, the only woman on the board, watched the door with an expression I couldn't read. The board chair, a man named Douglas Farr, who had joined after my grandfather's death, called the session to order. "We're here to address an ownership claim filed yesterday by Lenora Ashby, supported by a 2003 testamentary document authenticated by Frances Hollis of Hollis and Crane." "Frances, you have the floor." Frances rose. She was concise. She explained the document, its provenance, its authentication. She summarized my grandfather's language. She placed a copy of the will in front of each board member. My father interrupted twice. Douglas Farr stopped him both times. When Frances finished, she nodded at me. I stood. My voice was steadier than I expected it to be. "I'm not here to take anything from anyone," I said. "I'm here because my grandfather left me something, and he had reasons for it, and those reasons deserve to be heard." I opened the folder with the memos. "I also want to share some documents he compiled himself, because I think they're relevant to the board's understanding of how this company has been managed." I distributed the memos. I didn't editorialize. I let my grandfather's records speak. The room went quiet in a particular way. The way rooms go quiet when the thing everyone has been avoiding suddenly has paperwork. My father's voice, when he finally spoke, was controlled in the specific way that meant he was working very hard to keep it that way. "Those documents are internal records from strategy discussions. They're being misrepresented. They're board-level documents with date stamps," Frances said evenly. "They speak for themselves." Howard Briggs had been reading his copy of the memos for 3 minutes. He set them down and looked at my father steadily. "Reginald," he said, "I was on this board when some of these decisions were made. I had concerns at the time. I should have raised them more clearly. I'm raising them now." My father's jaw worked. He looked at me. Really looked at me. And I had the strange sensation of watching someone recalculate something they thought they'd already solved. "She has no operational experience," he said. It came out quieter than I think he intended. "I have a design degree and 8 years of project work," I said. "I know every vendor relationship your company runs, because I've been coordinating them for 3 years. I know the historic preservation contracts, because I grew up watching Pop explain them to me on job sites." I paused. "I don't want to run this company tomorrow. I want to make sure it's run the way Pop built it." Douglas Farr called a recess. The recess lasted 40 minutes. I drank bad coffee in the hallway and watched through the glass as Howard Briggs and Martha Ewan spoke quietly with the other board members. My father stood at the window of the conference room with his back to me. I couldn't see his face. I didn't need to. When they called us back in, Douglas Farr read the board's determination in the careful language of corporate governance. The 2003 will was valid and binding. The authentication was sound. Effective immediately, Lenora June Ashby held 52% of Ashby Renovation Group and all associated shareholder rights. The board also voted, 3-2, to reopen the audit of the 2008-2012 restructuring decisions and to restore the Historic Preservation Division as a protected operational category with dedicated resourcing. My father did not speak. He walked out of the conference room the way people leave places they no longer recognize as theirs, carefully, without looking back. I found him in the parking lot 10 minutes later. He was standing next to his truck, not getting in, just standing there with his keys in his hand. I had thought about what I would say in this moment. I had gone over it at 2 in the morning, sitting at my kitchen table. I had prepared a version that was strong, and a version that was kind, and a version that was just honest. What came out was simpler than any of them. "Pop saw something in me," I said. "I'm sorry you never could." He turned around. I expected anger. What I saw was something older and quieter. Something that looked at its edges like a man who had just finished being certain about something he'd spent 30 years being certain about. He didn't say anything, but he didn't walk away either. I left him there and drove home and sat in my apartment with the will on my kitchen table and my grandfather's words. The ability to look at something broken and know how to make it whole. I thought about that for a long time. The weeks that followed were disorienting in the specific way that big changes are. Not dramatically, but in small moments that keep catching you off guard. Emails addressed to me with titles I didn't recognize. Vendors calling to introduce themselves, as though we hadn't already spoken 100 times on scheduling calls. Howard Briggs stopping by my desk on a Thursday afternoon just to ask what I thought about a potential subcontractor relationship, and then sitting down to actually listen to my answer. Viveka called on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks after the board meeting. I almost didn't pick up. I didn't know, she said, before I could speak. About the second will, about what Pop wrote. I know. A long pause. Dad always said you weren't cut out for it. I believed him. I believed him. So did I said. For a long time she was quiet for a moment. I don't know how to do this differently. I don't know what different even looks like. Neither do I told her. But I'm willing to figure it out if you are. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was a starting point. That's all I can call it honestly. My father and I began talking again in small, careful increments. Sunday phone calls that lasted about 10 minutes. Topics that didn't require much vulnerability. He didn't apologize, not directly, not in words I would call a real apology. But he asked me once, in October, what I thought should happen with a historic restoration project in Asheville that the company had taken on. And I spent 20 minutes in explaining my perspective, and he didn't interrupt me once. It was the longest he'd ever listened to me. I'm not sure that counts as forgiveness. I'm not sure forgiveness is what I was after. What I wanted was simpler and harder. To be seen, in the present tense, by someone who had spent my whole life looking just past me. I started that October. It's a beginning. The Historic Preservation Division relaunched in January. We brought on 2 new designers and a structural conservator from a firm in Charleston. I lead the design review process, which means I spend my days doing exactly what Pop Ashby showed me in that Durham building when I was 14, looking at things that have been neglected and figuring out what they were always trying to be. My ADHD hasn't gone anywhere. I still have days when the focus won't come, and I have to build scaffolding around a task just to get started. I still miss things sometimes, small administrative things, dates and details that other people catch without trying. I have systems now, and I have a very patient operations coordinator named Tatum who sends me calendar reminders and doesn't make me feel terrible about needing them. What I know at 31 that I didn't know at 24 is that the things my family called weaknesses were just the shadow side of the things that make me good at this work. My brain moves differently. It always has. It makes me harder to manage and easier to underestimate. And for most of my life I let other people's ease of understanding become my measure of worth. My grandfather didn't. He watched. He waited until he understood what he was seeing. And then he made a document and put it in a sealed envelope and handed it to his attorney and said, "Give this to her when the time is right. She'll know what to do." I have his photograph on my desk. Not the formal one from company materials. The one my grandmother took in 1981. Him standing in front of a half-finished building in Durham, sawdust on his boots, squinting into the sun, grinning at something off camera. I look at it when the work is hard and I'm not sure I'm getting it right. He built something real. So can I.